Welcome to my version of the tiramisu cheesecake. You will need 2 packages of ladyfingers, 3/4 of a cup of black coffee, 3 8-ounce cream cheese blocks, 3/4 of a cup of granulated sugar, 3/4 of a teaspoon of vanilla extract, 3 large eggs, 3 tablespoons of peach brandy. For the whipping cream, you will need 2 cups of heavy whipping cream, 4 tablespoons of granulated sugar, and 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. For the garnish, you will need 12 maraschino cherries and 3 Hershey Kisses grated. The first thing we're going to do is take our springform pan and line it with parchment paper. We're cutting out the square for the bottom. Go ahead and assemble it. Next, we're going to fold 3-inch strips to do the sides of the springform pan. I like to line the sides of the springform pan with doubled over 3-inch strips. You'll see why later on in the video. So now I'm opening up the springform pan and overlapping those 2 3-inch strips. Now we're going to make a fence around the springform pan by trimming the bottom off of rows of the ladyfingers and putting them around the inside of the springform pan. We hang on to all those little pieces because we'll be filling in gaps later on. It doesn't matter if the rows of ladyfingers separate, you just keep going until you've got it completely surrounded. If you're using a 9-inch springform pan, you will probably have 1 ladyfinger left over from that package. Now we take the second package and line the bottom of the springform pan. And we're going to take all the little pieces and we're going to fill in any little gaps that are there. This is very forgiving. It doesn't have to be very precise. When you put the coffee and the filling in there, it will swell everything up and it will be perfect. Next, we're going to take 24 ounces of cream cheese, put that into the mixing bowl, add our 3/4 of a cup of sugar and 3/4 of a teaspoon of vanilla, put the paddle on and get that well blended. Once that is all incorporated, we're going to add 1 egg at a time and mix thoroughly until well blended. Once the eggs are well blended, we're going to go ahead and stop the mixer, remove the bowl, and scrape down the paddle. We're going to go ahead and reassemble the bowl back onto the mixer, and this time we're going to use the wire whisk. Next, we're going to blend in the 3 tablespoons of peach brandy. Get everything very well blended. Go ahead and stop the mixer and set that aside. Going back to our springform pan, we're going to drizzle that 3/4 of a cup of black coffee along the edges and then down into the bottom of the springform pan. Next, we add the cream cheese mixture into the springform pan. I've preheated the oven to 350 degrees, and on the bottom rack of the oven, I place a pie plate with some very hot water in it. I put the cheesecake on the center rack of the oven and set the timer for 40 minutes. While the cheesecake is baking, I take a glue gun and I glue the cake round to the bottom of the disposable cake container. Next, I take several sheets of parchment paper, fold them in half, and I trim them to 2 3/4 inch strips. Taking the strips, I go ahead and get an even side and trim that, then trim them into 5-inch lengths. So you have little rectangles that are 2 3/4 inches high by 5 inches long. These will be the strips that go between each slice of the tiramisu cheesecake. Once the center is set, the cheesecake is done, remove it from the oven and put it onto a wire rack and let it cool to room temperature. Once the cheesecake has reached room temperature, go ahead and release the side of the springform pan and wipe off any excess moisture. Carefully remove the strips of parchment paper from the ladyfingers. They'll have a tendency to want to stick, so be very careful. Support the ladyfingers and gradually peel the paper away. Cut those strips in half and wipe off any excess moisture on the clean half of that parchment paper. Reassemble the parchment paper onto the tiramisu and put the springform pan back together. Cover the springform pan with a sheet of aluminum foil. I use a large rubber band that helps to hold everything together, and freeze the tiramisu cheesecake overnight. Once the tiramisu cheesecake is frozen, go ahead and remove the aluminum foil, the sides of the springform pan, the parchment paper, and gradually separate the bottom of the tiramisu cheesecake from the parchment paper on its bottom. Leaving the parchment paper under the tiramisu cheesecake, go ahead and cut the cheesecake into quarters with a very sharp, thin knife. Divide each quarter into 3 slices for a total of 12 slices. Take each slice and add a piece of parchment paper to both sides, and then reassemble the tiramisu cheesecake onto the cake round. Next, prepare the whipped cream by adding 2 cups of heavy whipping cream to the chilled bowl, 2 teaspoons of vanilla, reassembling the mixer with the whisk and gradually whipping it until it thickens. Add the granulated sugar and continue to beat until the whipped cream is thick. Take a pastry bag with a star tip and fill it with the whipped cream. Fill each slice with the whipped cream, making sure you reserve some of the whipped cream for later on. Grate 3 Hershey Kisses. Dust the whipped cream with the shavings from the Hershey Kisses. Dot each slice with the remaining whipped cream. Press a cherry onto each dot, and you're done. Add the cover and refrigerate until served.